Hey, I'm Lee Balcom, and we've been talking about how do you work through difficulties in your marriage, but there's something that gets in the way. And I started thinking about it a bit more just because I got off a coaching call just a few minutes ago with a couple, and I could watch where they were struggling. And it was as if each one was pushing each other in opposite directions. And I could see that both of them wanted to be connected. I mean, isn't that what you want also, to be more connected with your spouse? And yet something kept them. It's like magnets, right? If you've ever played with magnets, I always love that feeling when you'd reverse them and try to push them together, and you could just feel this force pushing them apart. But if you just turned it a little bit, boom, they stuck together and held together. And I kept feeling like this couple wanted to be pulled together like that magnet, just together in that. But something was going the opposite way. Something was pushing them apart. This is something that I've seen in relationship after relationship. But I'll let you in on a little secret. It's something that's true for every single person. It doesn't mean that it gets in the way of every single relationship. But what got in the way is something that exists within you. In fact, there are two things within you that get in the way. Two things within me that can get in the way. And it's true in any relationship that these two things keep you in hitting this and actually, to say with the analogy, pushing each other apart. There are two fears. These two fears do damage in any relationship where not only are they activated, but they are charged up and rampant. And here's the little hitch to all of this. One often will trigger the other. One person having one fear often triggers the other person's fear. And so in the end, these are almost like opposite competing fears within you. So what are these two fears? Intimacy, the fear of intimacy, and abandonment, the fear of abandonment. So here's the interesting thing about fears. They exist deep within us, trying to protect us from something. But in the end, those fears often betray us because they are fears over things that we've created in our minds that are based on losing something that we want. There are two pieces that we all carry within us that we want to be connected with other people. It's a genetic thing that we have within our DNA. Our very DNA pulls us into connection, but it's a deep need that exists within us as humans. We want and need that connection. I've talked about that in another video about connection. And so that need for connection is deep within us. But there's another need, and that is the need to be me, right? I need to be not just me, but seen as me, seen as being this person, this individual. And so at the same time that we want this connection or love, we also want this individuality or this recognition, right? We want to be seen. And you just think back a little bit even to maybe high school, where everybody wanted to be an individual, so they all dressed up like everybody else to be part of a collective. In the same moment, they wanted to be their own selves like everyone else around them. And so in that moment, you see the pivot where we're struggling with wanting to be this individual, but not so much so that we get ostracized. And we want to be part of the collective, but not so much that we lose ourselves. And guess what? We carry that fact along with us into every relationship, particularly marriage. Why? Why particularly marriage? Because you're bound with somebody, right? You're connecting your future with somebody. Where you're headed, your spouse is going along. Where your spouse is going, you're going along, right? And so you're taking these two paths of individuals and you're bringing them together. And so you kind of do this polar walk, right? This side-by-side walk. And that's the you and me that I've talked about. But then you get married and you formed us, we. We are headed in this direction. And because of that connection, it starts bringing up some fears that we don't always think about or expect. And that's what happened with this couple. So let me just kind of briefly, I've already said what we want. We want connection and we want to be ourselves. We want connection and individuality all at the same time. Love and individuality all at the same time. So our fears are that we'll lose one or the other, right? Our fear of abandonment is based on the fear that we're going to lose this connection that we so want and need in our lives. This fear that we won't have that peace with us, that connection with us. So that is rooted all the way back to our earliest days when we were relying on somebody to recognize, hey, I need to be fed, I need to be held, I need to be changed, whatever it is. I'm uncomfortable, please help me. And so what we fear is that we will once again be uncomfortable and lose what we need in that place of support. Now, as adults, we don't need that same kind of help, the hand-holding, but really hold-holding that we did as infants, but it can trigger that same feeling. So if somebody that is very important to us moves too far away, it can trigger this fear, or let me say we perceive that they're moving far away. They don't even have to. We perceive that. Like a spouse who's quiet on the other side of the couch and you're wondering what's going on with them and why are they on their phone so much, and you could have suddenly a fear of abandonment get triggered there. Not because they're abandoning you, but because you feel the possibility you might lose that, right? They might actually be pulling further and further away, and that really triggered, but it doesn't have to be actuality to trigger a fear, right? We have fears all the time. You can fear that the boogeyman's going to come after you, even if you know that there's no boogeyman. Right? We just have these fears that capture us because that's what our brain does. Our brain weaves these fears. And so the fear of abandonment isn't the same as having the threat of abandonment. And that's the thing. It feels like the threat of abandonment, even if it's not. Okay, so the fear of abandonment. The other fear is the fear, almost the opposite of that, of intimacy. The fear of intimacy is like the fear that you'll get so close that you'll lose yourself. So close that you'll merge into that relationship to the layer that you'll lose your own identity. That also is often fear, not reality. Now, there are people who have so many struggles internally of who they are and what they're about that they'll look for the place to kind of join into and let that become them. That's not what we're talking about. They're not fearing intimacy. They're craving that so much that they're ready to bond in a way where they can actually lose themselves to it. This is the fear of intimacy, the fear of getting so close that I'll lose my individuality. And many times people struggle with that in an intimate relationship because they feel like they're supposed to give themselves up. And when I talk about being a we, it's one of the first things I hear from people, and it tells me about this fear that they're having, a fear of intimacy. They're like, oh, so I'm supposed to lose myself? I'm supposed to lose my individuality? It's not okay to be me? That's not it at all. In fact, it's kind of the reverse of that. You have to be a strong we. You have to work on bringing your best self, a strong me, in order to be a strong we. You have to bring your best self, right? If you're on a team, and I use that analogy pretty often about, if you're all on a team, what are you going for? The win. We're all going to win together, right? Or kick the ball or whatever it is that you're picking the sport. But we're in this to win, not to lose myself to the team. I gain an identity, right? I am me, and I'm also a part of the team, not I'm just a part of the team. And not I'm just me, I'm the hot dog over here who is the team, right? It's a combination. So the fear of intimacy is the fear that we will lose ourselves. Again, that's not a healthy relationship if that's the case. So it's a false fear. But false fears are what fuel lots of our problems. False fears fuel lots of issues. False fears get in our way of so many things in life. So a false fear of intimacy, the fear of intimacy, but it's falsely based, is it will lose ourselves to the relationship. The reality is we have to bring our best self into a place of connection where we don't lose ourselves to it, but we are in a secure place of that. Now, in other videos, I'll talk about our attachment styles that can make a difference in how they play out in a relationship. But for now, let's just stick with this basic two fears, right? Fear of abandonment, fear of intimacy. Your attachment style may say something about how quickly your fear of abandonment is triggered and how stably you can hold on to that. But that's kind of outside of this. We'll talk about that another time. What we want to focus on is the fact that in a marriage, one often triggers the other. So let's for a moment talk about a couple of ways that people can respond to a fear of abandonment. There are two primary. One is to try to pull the person that you perceive may be abandoning you closer. Pull them in, right? Hold on to them tight. That's one. The other is to push them aside and get away as quick as you can, because I would rather abandon than be abandoned, is what the mindset says. More often, it's try to pull them in. If I'm fearing abandonment, I'll pull them in. So many times what I watch happen is when people are working on trying to save a troubled relationship is they start grabbing at a spouse. They start begging and pleading and trying to get them to say, I love you, and get them to hug and get them to hold. And they're working hard to get them to do something close to disprove that fear of abandonment. So much so that the other person goes, whoa, 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 because what's been triggered for them? Their fear of intimacy. They're suddenly fearing that they're going to lose themselves because you're so desperate for that, and so they push away. So let's go the other way. Let's say you have a fear of intimacy and things are just getting a little too close. So what do? I need some space, need some distance, right? That's how we deal primarily with the fear of intimacy. Give me some space. Let me hold on to myself. Let me hold on to who I am. So push you away, right? Get this space there. And so when people say, I need space, I feel crowded, I need some space, they're talking about from their fear of intimacy. They're talking from that place of fear of intimacy. Guess what happens when one person pushes the other person away? They trigger their fear of abandonment. So imagine a couple going through these gyrations where one's fear of abandonment is triggering the other person's fear of intimacy, and one's fear of intimacy is triggering the other person's fear of abandonment, and back and forth they go, trying to find some place where they can manage it. Now let's add another twist to it. I told you that you have both of those within you. You may have one that is more easily triggered than the other, but you have both within you, both the fear of abandonment and the fear of intimacy. So let's say that you have a fear of abandonment, and so you're trying to hold them close. And in that process, they're like, I can't, and they move away, right? So that's going to keep you stuck in this fear of abandonment. But if they move close to you, you may suddenly go, whoa, that's too close. I need some space. Or let's go the other way. Let's say you have a fear of intimacy, and so you create your space, and your spouse says, okay, that's fine. I'm going to move this far away. And you go, wait a minute, I didn't want to lose that. My fear of abandonment is now triggered. My fear of abandonment is going to be triggered by the fact that they've now moved further away than I'm comfortable. See, we're trying to find, it's like the magnets, right? If you hold those two magnets repelling each other, you'll find that there is a zone where the pressure is there, but you don't have to force it, just kind of a homeostatic point, right? There's a space between there. And that's what couples are trying to find. What is a safe point? That's always going to be a struggle for couples, to find that place that is safe and makes sense for them. And it's going to be different for each couple. And the problem is when they haven't quite found that. And so they're kind of doing this, right? They keep trying to find a way of not triggering each other, and they continue to. In fact, many couples find themselves in deep trouble simply because they can't find the place. And finally, one or both go, I'm done with this. You're trying to get too much of me, or I'm not getting enough of you. And suddenly those fears trigger the crisis. The first part of dealing with all this is understanding that these fears are within us. Second one is understanding that fears are different than reality. Abandonment isn't really something that happens once you're able to take care of yourself. A baby can be abandoned, an adult can be left, but you can fend for yourself. Fear of intimacy, you don't lose yourself in a relationship, right? You maintain yourself no matter what wherever you are, you're going along with you. Might you change who you are in some ways in a relationship? Sure, that's called growth, right? We change throughout our lives, and so we're always in the process of transformation. And who we are, that thing we're afraid we're going to lose, it's kind of illusory anyway. Who I am depends on who I'm with and where I am and what role I have and what I'm trying to bring forward. And so these are, in some ways, false fears, but still fears that can fuel this. So when we recognize those fears are there, we can begin to recognize why we may be triggering a spouse or being triggered ourselves. And that's the first step of this. Beyond that, though, we've got to find a way of creating the place where both are fitting and both are held together. So suddenly that the magnets are attracting and pulling together. Now that's where I come in. That's what I've been doing for my career now for 3 decades, of helping couples find their place, of being connected, of being themselves connected, of being their best selves, of thriving in their life so they can thrive in their relationship. I'd love to help you with that. If I can be of help, come visit me at savethemarriage.com. That's savethemarriage.com. This is Lee Balcom wishing you the best as you work to save your marriage.